Welcome to Podkey Daily News, your fast brief on the day's biggest shifts and signals. A heat wave disrupted Independence Day celebrations. The Supreme Court delivered a surprisingly narrow birthright ruling, and new fractures opened inside U.S. politics. Abroad, Ukraine hit Russian fuel infrastructure, Iran turned a funeral into geopolitical messaging, and Germany saw mass protests over deportation politics. The clearest practical story from the 4th of July was disruption. Record heat forced cancellations of major parades in Washington and Philadelphia, suspended fireworks in several states, and even disrupted the flagship Salute to America gala with evacuations and public health warnings. That matters beyond one holiday, because it shows climate extremes are now directly reshaping large public events, crowd safety planning, and city logistics. What to watch next is whether heat contingency plans become standard for summer civic gatherings, especially in dense urban areas. At the same time, the anniversary message itself turned sharply partisan. Trump used his Independence Day address to say America will never be a communist country, leaning on Cold War language and framing opponents as an existential threat. Democratic leaders answered by accusing him of turning the 250th anniversary into a political rally instead of a unifying commemoration. Trump's Freedom 250 operation rejected that as a smear, but the practical takeaway is straightforward. Even shared national rituals are now contested political terrain. That lands in a country already sounding less confident in itself. Recent polling suggests Americans are now slightly less patriotic than people in many other countries, a notable drop from the mood around the 1976 bicentennial. The Supreme Court narrowly upheld birthright citizenship, and the surprise was how close the vote was. Many expected a more comfortable outcome. Why it matters is that a narrow ruling rarely settles a politically charged issue. Instead, it signals vulnerability, invites new legal tests, and keeps immigration at the center of campaign strategy. Watch for fresh state-level challenges, renewed congressional pressure, and another possible return to the court if advocates on either side think the current balance is still movable. Trump's latest financial disclosures showed more than $1 billion in earnings during his first year back in office, a scale far beyond recent presidents. The practical issue here is ethics and leverage. Critics say profits on that scale create severe conflict of interest concerns and strengthen calls for tighter disclosure rules, stronger oversight, and clearer barriers between office and personal business gain. At the same time, former allies, including Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene, say they want to launch a new political party. If that effort gets any traction, it points to real fragmentation inside the Republican coalition rather than just headline drama. It's early, but this is what to watch, whether the project attracts donors, ballot access efforts, or defections from elected conservatives. If it does, that could complicate races well beyond the presidential level. Another sign of structural strain came out of Illinois, where rural counties are pushing to secede and form a 51st state, citing frustration with Chicago-centered politics. That proposal faces steep legal and political barriers, but it reflects the same underlying problem. Regional identity is colliding with existing governing maps. Ukraine struck oil terminals in St. Petersburg and Crimea, aiming to create fuel shortages inside Russia. For a major oil producer to feel pressure on refined fuel supply is strategically and symbolically important. The point of these attacks is to bring the war's costs closer to daily Russian life and, in theory, increase domestic pressure on the Kremlin ahead of international summits. The next thing to watch is whether Russia has to shift imports or reroute refining capacity in visible ways. In Iran, multi-city funeral events for Ayatollah Khamenei were presented by officials as proof of regime stability, with delegations attending from Russia, Pakistan, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. But the ceremonies also doubled as overt political theater. Anti-U.S. chants and red signs calling to kill Trump turned mourning into messaging, which tells you Tehran wanted both internal consolidation and external signaling on display. Germany's far-right AfD is facing intense backlash over its remigration agenda, a term critics describe as a euphemism for mass deportations. Public use of the language by leader Alice Weidel helped trigger fears among migrants and large protests around the party conference. Police deployed thousands of officers, plus water cannons, horses, and helicopters to secure the event. The larger relevance is that immigration politics in Europe keep moving from debate into direct street confrontation. In Venezuela, twin earthquakes have pushed the death toll toward nearly 3,000, with thousands still missing. Survivors describe overwhelmed rescue efforts, makeshift morgues in shipping containers, and a sharp gap between official claims and conditions on the ground. That gap matters because disaster legitimacy is political. When public testimony and government messaging diverge this sharply, trust erodes fast and recovery gets harder. Two sports stories are worth your attention for very different reasons. First, Brad Parks' account of building wheelchair tennis is a reminder that legitimacy in adaptive sport had to be fought for step by step. Early officials argued wheelchair users could not move laterally, but adapted rules including the two-bounce allowance helped establish the sport, which became Paralympic in 1992. The broader point is that inclusion often starts as a rules argument before it becomes common sense. Second, England's upcoming match against Mexico at the Estadio Azteca comes with a very practical warning. Altitude and heat can drain energy fast if a team has not acclimatized. At roughly 2,200 meters above sea level, conditions can shape the match as much as rankings do. A few lighter stories still carried a practical edge. In North Wales, a fisherman survived 4 hours in cold water after his boat capsized by clinging to a fish storage cooler box until tides pushed him ashore. It's a vivid reminder that ordinary equipment can become survival gear in an emergency. In Uganda, skateboarder Jason Van Poel finished a 6,000-kilometer, 106-day skate from Uganda to Cape Town to raise money for a skate park in Kampala. The funding drive worked, but the real bottleneck now is land acquisition, which matters because local kids are still being displaced from informal skating spaces. And on Ben Nevis, Catherine, Princess of Wales, had a warm exchange with Pete Haslam and his paraplegic son Ted during the Three Peaks Challenge. The detail people remembered was that she later remembered Ted's name, and the publicity helped push donations for the Wilmarthen Cancer Charity Trek from a 5,000-pound target to more than 13,000. That's the brief for now. You're listening to Podkey Daily News, and we'll be back with the next round of signals that actually matter. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.